The great hall was filled with people that evening, everyone waiting for the famous American musician to play his trumpet. He was a man known around the world. His name alone could draw a crowd. His music was powerful, fast, and full of pride. He believed no one could stand against him, and for years no one ever did. When he played, the audience would rise to their feet and cheer. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who thought he was untouchable. But that night something unexpected happened as he prepared to perform. His eyes landed on a young woman in the crowd. She held a trumpet close to her chest. She looked nervous but also determined. Her clothes were plain, and no one recognized her. She was not famous, not known in the music world. To him she was nothing but a girl who dared to bring an instrument into his hall. He smirked and pointed at her, his voice echoing in the hall. "Do you think you can play like me? Do you believe you can match me?" The crowd laughed because to them it seemed like a joke. No one could believe this unknown young woman would stand against such a legend. The young woman's face turned pale. Her heart pounded inside her chest. For a moment she wanted to hide. She wanted to run away. But then she remembered her father. She remembered the nights when he sat with her in a small garage, teaching her how to hold the trumpet, how to blow through it with all her heart. He had told her that music was not about showing off, it was about telling a story. It was about making people feel. His words gave her courage. So when the famous musician repeated his challenge, she lifted her chin and said softly but firmly, "Yes, I accept." The entire hall gasped. People could not believe what they had just heard. Whispers filled the air. "She must be crazy," one person said. "She will embarrass herself," another added. Some laughed. Others shook their heads, but the young woman stood straight, holding her trumpet tightly in her hands. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. She knew this was a chance she could never run from. The famous musician raised an eyebrow. His pride pushed him to continue. "Very well then," he said with a smile that was half mocking. "Let us see what you have." He called for the stage to be cleared, and the spotlight fell on the two of them, the legend and the unknown, standing side by side, one with years of fame and honor, the other with nothing but determination and the memory of her father's lessons. As the audience watched, the hall fell into silence. Everyone was waiting for the show to begin. The musician prepared his trumpet, spinning it in his hand like a weapon. He looked at her with confidence, as though the result was already decided. But when she raised her trumpet, her face softened. She was not thinking about beating him. She was thinking about her father, about the promise she made to herself that one day she would let the world hear her heart through music. The challenge had started, though no notes had been played yet. The tension in the room was thick. People leaned forward in their seats, some eager to watch her fail, others secretly curious if she had something hidden. Even the musician's band members whispered to each other, wondering if this duel would be a waste of time or something they had never seen before. She took a deep breath, her hands still trembling, but in her chest burned a fire that no one could see. It was the fire of years of practice, of nights spent playing until her lips were sore, of the grief she carried since her father passed away. Now all that pain and passion was about to be tested. The famous musician gave a small laugh, a laugh filled with arrogance. He thought it would be an easy win. He thought he would crush her in front of everyone. But the young woman did not flinch. She knew what was coming, and she was ready. The duel was set. One side held fame, power, and experience. The other held courage, passion, and heart. The crowd could feel the energy. They could sense that something rare was about to happen. The unexpected challenge had been accepted, and nothing in that hall would ever be the same again. The hall was still buzzing after the young woman accepted the challenge. Some laughed, some whispered, and some shook their heads. They believed she had no chance against the famous musician. To them, she was just a foolish girl walking into her own failure. But inside her heart she carried something the crowd could not see, a secret that gave her strength. She had grown up far away from big cities and concert halls. Her home was a small house on the edge of town. Her father was not a famous man. He was a simple worker who loved music more than anything. He owned an old trumpet, scratched and worn from years of playing. He never performed on big stages, but in the evenings he would sit in the garage, lift the trumpet, and fill the air with melodies that carried warmth, sadness, and joy. As a child, the young woman would sit nearby, her small hands resting on her knees, her eyes wide with wonder. She remembered the nights when the garage door stayed open, and neighbors passing by would stop to listen. Her father's music had that kind of power. It was not loud or flashy, but it touched the heart, he used to say. Music is not about how fast you play or how high you go. It is about what you make people feel. Those words carved themselves deep inside her. When she was 10, her father placed the trumpet in her hands for the first time. It was too big for her, heavy and awkward. Her first sound was weak, almost like a broken whistle, but her father clapped and smiled as if she had played a masterpiece. "That is your beginning," he said. "One day your trumpet will speak louder than words." From that moment she promised herself she would never stop. Her secret was not about fame or expensive training. She never studied in great music schools. She never had wealthy teachers. Her father was her only guide. He worked during the day, and at night he gave her every moment he had. Together they practiced in that small garage, with cracked walls and a single light bulb hanging above. While other children played games outside, she played scales until her fingers hurt. While others slept, she played until her lips were swollen. Then came the day when everything changed. Her father grew sick. His strong hands turned weak. The trumpet lay silent for weeks. The young woman begged him to rest and recover, but deep down she knew he would not heal. On his final night, he called her to his side. He handed her the trumpet with shaking hands. "This trumpet is yours now," he whispered. "Promise me you will never stop. Promise me you will let the world hear your heart." Tears blurred her eyes as she nodded. That night she lost her father, but she gained a purpose that no one could take away. Years passed and she never forgot her promise. She practiced harder than ever. Sometimes with tears rolling down her face, sometimes with fire in her chest. She played in the park on empty streets, and in the small market where people barely noticed her. Some dropped coins, some ignored her, but she kept going. Every note she played was a conversation with her father. Every melody was her way of keeping him alive. This was the secret the crowd did not know. They only saw a trembling girl with no fame, but behind her stood years of hidden pain and love. Behind her stood nights of practice no one had witnessed. Behind her stood the memory of a man who believed in her more than anyone else. When she stepped onto that stage to face the famous musician, she carried her father's trumpet. It was not shiny, it was not new. It had dents and scratches, but it held her entire life inside it, every lesson, every tear, every dream. She touched the mouthpiece with her lips, and in her mind she whispered, "This is for you." "Papa," the audience thought she was foolish, but she was not thinking about them. She was not even thinking about winning. She was thinking about the promise she made. She was thinking about proving to herself and to her father that his belief in her was not wasted. The famous musician across from her had a golden trumpet, polished and glowing under the stage lights. His posture screamed power, but the young woman knew that her strength came from somewhere else. His music came from pride. Her music came from the heart, and deep inside she believed the heart could reach farther than pride. The hall grew quiet as the duel prepared to begin. The young woman took a deep breath. She could still hear her father's voice guiding her. She could still feel his presence in the silence. No one in that room understood what was inside her, but they were about to find out, and when they did, everything would change. The hall grew silent, the air heavy with suspense. The famous musician stood tall in the center of the stage, his golden trumpet gleaming under the bright lights. Every movement he made showed confidence. He had done this 1,000 times before. He had performed in grand halls in front of kings and presidents. He knew how to control the crowd. He believed this duel would be nothing more than another chance to remind everyone why he was untouchable. Across from him stood the young woman, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped her father's old trumpet. The metal was dull, scratched, and bent in places. It looked nothing compared to the shining instrument of the musician, but to her it was worth more than gold. It carried her father's voice, his love and his lessons. She took a deep breath, trying to silence the storm inside her chest. She knew if her nerves won, she would fail before she even played the first note. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the first sound. The announcer stepped back and gave a nod. The duel had officially begun. The musician raised his trumpet with a sharp motion. His lips touched the mouthpiece, and without hesitation he blasted the first note. It was strong, bold, and loud enough to rattle the walls. People clapped instantly. Already convinced of his victory, he followed with a series of fast, complicated runs, his fingers flying over the valves with practiced ease. Each note climbed higher, sharper, faster. It was a storm of sound, a display of raw skill and technical power. The audience erupted with cheers. Some stood up, shouting his name. They clapped to the rhythm of his playing. The hall seemed alive with excitement. He smiled proudly as he played, glancing at the young woman with eyes that said, "You cannot touch this." He ended his opening with a long, powerful note that seemed to hang in the air forever. When it finally stopped, the hall exploded in applause. The young woman's heart pounded. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stay still. She could feel every eye in the room pressing down on her, waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to embarrass herself. She lifted her trumpet slowly, her lips trembled. For a brief second she thought she might lose her breath. But then she remembered her father's words. Do not play to impress. Play to tell your story. She closed her eyes and whispered inside. This is for you, Papa. Her trumpet rose. She inhaled deeply and then the first note left her lips. It was soft, gentle, almost fragile. The crowd tilted their heads, surprised by the sound. It was not loud like the musicians. It did not shake the walls, but it carried a strange sweetness. Like a voice whispering straight to the heart, some in the crowd stopped clapping. The laughter died down. They leaned forward. Drawn in by the unexpected softness, she continued, her fingers moving carefully, weaving a melody that was slow and emotional. It was not a storm, it was a story, each note rising and falling like the sound of someone breathing, like the memory of something lost. Her trumpet did not shout. It spoke, it sang of nights in the garage, of her father's tired hands guiding hers, of her promise to never stop. Her music carried her pain, her love, her grief, and the hope still burning inside her. The crowd grew quiet. Even the people who had been laughing were now silent. The sound wrapped around them like a soft blanket. It touched something deep inside. Children leaned against their parents. Old men wiped their eyes. Even the band members behind the famous musician exchanged uneasy looks. The famous musician frowned. He had expected her to stumble, to play weak and out of tune, but instead she had captured the audience's attention with just a few gentle notes. It unsettled him, because he knew technical skill alone could not create that kind of silence. Only true emotion could. And he had not felt such emotion from music in years. She played on, her eyes closed, forgetting the crowd, forgetting the challenge. For her there was only the trumpet and the memory of her father. Her fingers moved smoother now, the trembling fading, the sound stronger, more confident. Her story was flowing out into the hall, a story no one had heard before but everyone could feel. When she lowered the trumpet after her first passage, the silence in the hall was deafening. No one clapped, no one cheered, they simply sat still, their hearts caught in the quiet power of her song. The famous musician shifted uncomfortably. His pride stung. He forced a smile and lifted his trumpet again, determined to crush her with his next round. The duel had only just begun. But already the crowd felt something unusual. It was no longer just a contest of speed and volume. It was becoming a battle between two worlds, one built on fame, pride, and mastery, the other built on memory, love, and passion. And as the audience looked at the young woman, they began to wonder if this duel might not end the way they had expected. The duel moved into its second round. The famous musician had already shown his power. His notes had filled the hall with thunder. But now the young woman stood with her father's old trumpet in her hands, her eyes closed for a moment, her chest rising with a deep breath. She was not thinking about the crowd, not even about the man beside her. She was thinking about her father, about the nights when the two of them sat in the garage. The light dim, the air cold, but the music warm. She let those memories fill her heart before lifting the trumpet again. Her lips touched the mouthpiece and the first note came out soft like a whisper. It was not strong or heavy, it was delicate, like the first drop of rain on dry ground. The audience leaned forward, curious, wondering what she was trying to do. Then slowly she built the melody, each note carrying emotion, each sound pulling on the strings of the heart. It was not music made to impress. It was music made to tell a story. The famous musician frowned as he listened, his eyes narrowed. He had expected her to fight back with energy, to try to match his speed or his strength. But she did the opposite. Instead of power, she gave feeling. Instead of showing off, she gave honesty. Her trumpet seemed to cry, to laugh, to remember, and the audience felt it. It was as if she was speaking directly to them without using words. Some people in the hall placed their hands over their mouths. Others sat back with tears forming in their eyes. Her notes carried sadness but also hope, loneliness but also love. It was like hearing someone's life written into music, and the crowd could not turn away. They could not laugh anymore. They were trapped by the invisible rope her trumpet tied around their hearts. The musician grew restless. He tapped his foot against the stage, his pride wounded. Because for years he had controlled audiences with force. He had bent them to his will with his speed and fire, but this young woman, this nobody, was holding them with nothing but gentle notes. Her music made them silent. Her music made them listen, and he hated that. But the young woman did not look at him. She did not care for his reaction. She let her trumpet speak for her, and with every breath she pushed more of herself into the sound. The garage, the broken chair where her father used to sit, the warm smile he gave her when she played wrong notes, the night she promised she would never stop. All of it poured out into the hall. The lights above seemed softer now. The crowd seemed to fade. For a moment the hall turned into that garage, and everyone sitting there felt like they were sitting with her, listening to a story they had no words for. Children who had never lost anyone suddenly understood the feeling of loss. Men who thought themselves strong felt their eyes burn. Women clutched their chests as if something inside them had broken open. When she reached the higher notes, her trumpet did not scream, it soared, like a bird breaking free from a cage. The sound wrapped itself around every ear and every heart, and people forgot that this was supposed to be a duel. They forgot about winning and losing. They just listened. The famous musician could not hide his discomfort. He forced a smile, but it was thin. His fingers tapped nervously against his trumpet. He realized the danger now. He realized that the audience was slipping away from him, and for the first time in many years he felt fear. Fear that someone might outshine him not with speed or power, but with truth. The young woman's melody came to an end. Her last note hung in the air, soft and trembling but pure. Then it faded into silence. The hall was frozen. No one clapped at first. No one shouted. They simply sat still, the weight of what they had heard pressing down on them. Some wiped their eyes, others simply looked at her in awe. She lowered her trumpet slowly, her hands still shaking but her eyes calm, because she knew she had spoken what she needed to say. That silence was louder than any applause. The famous musician shifted uncomfortably in the quiet. He had wanted the audience to roar for him, but instead they sat stunned for her, and he knew he could not let it continue. He gripped his golden trumpet tighter, his pride demanding that he strike back harder in the next round. But deep inside, the audience had already changed. They had already begun to see that music was more than show, more than fame, more than strength. They had seen music as a language of the heart, and that night, it was the young woman's heart that was speaking the loudest. The duel was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The legend of the stage had met a challenger he did not understand, and the young woman, carrying nothing but her father's memory and an old trumpet, had already done the unthinkable. She had shaken the soul of everyone in that hall, including the man who thought himself untouchable. The air inside the hall had changed. When the young woman finished her soft but powerful melody, the silence spoke louder than applause. The famous musician felt the silence like a wound. He wanted cheers, he wanted roars, but the people sat frozen, their hearts still caught by the sound of her trumpet. He gritted his teeth, lifting his golden trumpet again. Determined to take back what he had lost, he drew in a deep breath and began his second round. This time faster, louder, and sharper than before. The notes exploded from his trumpet like lightning, bouncing off the walls. He played runs so quick the audience could barely follow. Every sound was perfect, clean, and strong. He wanted to remind them why he was a legend, why his name filled halls, why no one had ever dared to stand against him. The crowd clapped along. Some shouted with excitement, but not all. A few still sat quietly, their minds replaying the gentle story they had just heard from the young woman. He ended his passage with a blast of sound so powerful it shook the lights above the stage. Sweat rolled down his forehead. He looked at her with eyes that burned with pride and anger, daring her to match what he had just done. He thought she would be crushed, that she would stumble and give up. The young woman stood still for a moment, her old trumpet held tightly in her hands. She could feel the weight of the challenge. She knew she could not match his speed. She could not match his strength. If she tried to copy him, she would surely fail. So she closed her eyes and listened to her heart. Her father's words echoed again. Play to tell your story, not to win. Her lips trembled as she placed the trumpet to her mouth. The first notes came slow, not soft this time, but steady. Her sound rose like the beginning of a sunrise, calm at first, then brighter, warmer, reaching deeper into the hall. She did not try to overpower him. Instead, she answered him with emotion. If his trumpet was thunder, hers was rain, falling on the hearts of the people. The crowd began to shift again. Some who had cheered wildly for him now turned silent. Listening to her, her music carried a rising tension, the sound of struggle, of pushing forward despite pain, of fighting against something larger than yourself. It was not technical brilliance, but it had a truth in it that the audience could not escape. She climbed higher into the melody, her fingers moving faster, but not to show off. Each note had a weight. Each run carried a piece of her heart. It was like she was opening her soul in front of everyone. The hall grew quiet once more, their eyes wide, their breaths caught. Even those who had doubted her now leaned closer, afraid to miss a single note. The famous musician felt a sting in his chest. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, but deep inside he knew he was losing the crowd again. He knew that his sound, no matter how perfect, did not reach them the same way hers did. His trumpet dazzled their ears, but hers touched their hearts, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. She lowered her trumpet slowly after her passage, the final note fading like the last ray of sunlight. The audience sat frozen once again. Then slowly a wave of clapping began, not wild cheers this time, but strong, heartfelt applause. It grew louder and louder until the whole hall was filled with it. The young woman lowered her head humbly, tears burning in her eyes. The famous musician lifted his trumpet quickly. Refusing to be defeated, he blasted out another set of notes. Sharper, louder, more furious, the hall shook again. His fingers flew with incredible speed, his face red with effort. He wanted to bury her sound under his own. He wanted to remind everyone who he was, but even as he played, he noticed something. The applause did not feel the same anymore. People clapped, but their hearts were not with him. They were watching her, waiting for her turn again. The tension between them grew heavier, each round pulling the crowd back and forth. But with every note she played, the balance tipped in her favor. Her honesty and passion clashed with his pride and power. The duel was no longer just about skill. It was about two different meanings of music. By the end of the round, the audience was torn in two. Some shouted the musician's name, refusing to let go of their hero. Others clapped for the young woman, their voices trembling with emotion. The hall felt like a battlefield, and at the center stood two figures, one golden, polished, and proud, the other plain, scarred, but unbreakable. The young woman wiped her eyes, raised her trumpet again, and took a deep breath. She was not afraid anymore. She was ready to give everything she had. The famous musician clenched his jaw, sweat dripping, determined to crush her once and for all. The duel was not finished, but the tension was at its peak. Every person in the hall knew they were watching something rare, something that would be remembered for years. It was no longer just a contest. It had become a fight between pride and heart, and the outcome was more uncertain than ever. The duel had reached its highest tension. The famous musician's face was red, his body shaking with effort. Sweat rolled down his forehead as he gripped his golden trumpet tightly. He had poured all his power into the last passage, but something felt wrong. His final notes had slipped one after another, small mistakes that no one expected from him. His breath was heavy, his chest rising and falling like he had run a race. He had never struggled like this on stage before. Across from him stood the young woman, her plain, scratched trumpet resting lightly in her hands. She was tired too, her lips sore, her lungs burning, but her eyes were calm, steady and full of fire. She remembered her father's words again. Play with your heart, and the world will listen. She lifted the trumpet to her lips and closed her eyes. The hall grew silent as she began her next passage. The first note came soft, trembling, almost breaking, but then it grew stronger, rising higher, carrying emotion so raw that it felt like a cry from the soul. The audience leaned forward, their hearts tightening. The sound was not perfect, it was not polished, but it was alive. It carried pain, loss, love, and hope all in one breath. She played as if the trumpet itself was her voice, telling her father's story, her story, and the story of every person who ever lost something they loved. The sound filled every corner of the hall, and the people felt tears forming without even knowing why. The famous musician watched her, his hands shaking, his pride burning. He raised his trumpet and tried to answer her with speed and volume. He blasted notes so fast and sharp that the hall shook again, but the more he forced, the emptier it sounded. It was strong but hollow. It dazzled the ears but did not touch the heart. The audience clapped politely, but their faces were turned back to her. His golden trumpet felt heavy now, his fingers stiff. He was pushing his body past its limit, and deep inside he knew the truth. He was losing, not because he lacked skill, but because he lacked what she had: sincerity, love, and the ability to bleed her heart into every note. She did not notice his struggle. She was lost in her music, her eyes shut, her mind filled with the image of her father. She remembered his rough hands guiding hers, his tired smile when she hit a wrong note, the warmth of his voice when he told her she could make the trumpet speak. And with every memory she played stronger. She poured her grief into the horn. She poured her love into the air. Her sound was not just music anymore. It was truth. The hall was no longer a hall. It was her garage, the dim light, the smell of oil and dust, the broken chair where her father sat, and for a moment everyone in that room felt like they were standing inside that memory with her. They saw it, they felt it, they lived it. The famous musician's knees weakened. His last attempt to overpower her ended in a sharp, broken note that cracked across the hall. Gasps rose from the crowd. They had never heard him fail like that before. His face turned pale, his lips trembling. He tried to fix it, but the damage was done. The legend had stumbled. The young woman lifted her trumpet for the final line of her solo. Her chest heaving, her hands trembling. She closed her eyes tighter and thought of the night her father gave her the trumpet, his last words echoing, "Promise me you will never stop." She blew the air from her lungs with everything she had left, and the trumpet answered with a cry so pure, so aching, that the entire hall seemed to shatter under its weight. The note soared high, then broke softly into silence. The sound faded like the last breath of a song. The young woman lowered her trumpet slowly, her body shaking, tears rolling down her cheeks. The hall was dead quiet. No one moved, no one breathed. They were frozen in the moment, their hearts torn open. The famous musician lowered his golden trumpet, his hands limp, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had faced countless challengers in his life, but never had he been broken like this. Not by force, but by heart. His pride cracked, his shoulders slumped, and he could no longer hide his defeat. The audience sat stunned, their eyes shifting from him to her. They realized they had just witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. The breaking point had come, and the legend had fallen not because he was weak, but because she was strong in a way he could never be. For years people would talk about that night, the night when a young woman with no name and a broken trumpet faced a legend, the night when pride cracked and passion rose. And in that moment, as silence filled the hall, the world began to understand that music was not just about notes, but about the heart that carried them. The silence in the hall felt endless. The young woman's last note still echoed in the hearts of everyone sitting there. She lowered her trumpet slowly, her chest rising and falling as if she had poured out every drop of air. Every drop of strength she had left. Her hands shook. Her eyes were wet, but her face was calm. She had done what she came to do. She had played with her whole heart. The famous musician stood frozen, his golden trumpet hanging in his hand. Sweat covered his face, his proud shoulders slumped. He had always been the man who never lost, who crushed every challenge with ease. Yet now he stood in front of a crowd that was not cheering for him, not even looking at him. They were staring at her, the unknown young woman with the scratched trumpet. For a long moment no one moved. The audience sat stunned, their hearts heavy, as if they had witnessed something sacred. Then slowly a sound rose, a single pair of hands clapping, then another and another. Soon the whole hall was filled with applause. It was not the wild cheer they usually gave to the famous musician. It was deeper, stronger, a roar of respect and love. They stood from their seats, giving her the ovation that belonged to her alone. The young woman blinked in surprise. She had expected silence, maybe pity. She had not expected this. Her lips trembled as she bowed her head, her trumpet held close to her chest. She thought of her father, of the nights in the garage, of the promise she had made. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of release, of joy, of love. The famous musician felt the sound of the applause pierce him like arrows. Every clap reminded him that he had lost, but it was not only defeat he felt, it was something deeper, something he could not explain. He looked at her, and for the first time in his life he understood what he had been missing. He had mastered the notes, the speed, the strength, but he had forgotten the heart. He raised his head slowly, his eyes on her, and the audience grew quiet again, waiting. No one knew what he would do. He was known for his pride, for never admitting weakness, for crushing anyone who stood against him. But then something no one expected happened. He lowered his golden trumpet to the floor and stepped forward. The young woman looked up, startled. He walked toward her slowly, his eyes not filled with anger but with something softer. When he reached her, he stopped and stared at her scratched old trumpet. Then he looked into her eyes and gave a small nod. The hall gasped. People covered their mouths in shock. The famous musician, the legend, the man who bowed to no one, lowered his head to her in respect. It was the moment that shocked everyone. The legend admitting defeat, not through words but through a simple bow. The young woman's eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. She never wanted to humiliate him. She only wanted to keep her promise to her father. But now here he was, bowing to her, and the weight of that moment crushed her heart with emotion. The audience roared again, this time louder than before. Some cried openly, Others shouted her name even though most of them did not even know it. They knew only that they had witnessed history, that they had seen the day a no-name girl stood before a legend and made him bend his pride. The famous musician straightened slowly, his face pale but calm. He spoke at last, his voice low but clear enough to reach the hall. "Tonight I did not lose to speed or power," he said. "I lost to truth." The crowd fell silent again, every ear straining to hear. "Her trumpet speaks what mine has forgotten." His words hung in the air, and for once no one doubted them. The young woman shook her head quickly, tears falling. "No, sir. I did not want to defeat you," she whispered. But her voice carried because the hall was so quiet. "I only wanted to play for my father." She held the trumpet tighter, her voice breaking. This was his dream, not mine. The audience felt their hearts twist at her words. The famous musician gave a faint smile, one filled with both sorrow and respect. "Then your father must have been a great man," he said softly, "because he raised a musician greater than me." The young woman's knees weakened. She nearly fell, but the applause lifted her. The audience's clapping surrounded her like a wave. She had come as nobody, mocked and doubted, but now she stood as the one who had touched every heart in the hall, the one who made a legend bow. That night would be remembered forever. Not as the night of a duel, but as the night the world learned again that true music is not found in fame, not in golden trumpets, not in pride, but in honesty, in love, in the stories carried through simple, trembling notes. The young woman looked up at the ceiling, the bright lights blurring through her tears. She whispered to herself so softly no one else could hear, "Papa, we did it." And for the first time since he left her, she felt at peace. The shocking outcome was not only her victory, it was the awakening of everyone in that hall, the realization that greatness could come from anywhere, even from a quiet girl with a scratched trumpet and a promise to keep. And from that night on, nothing in the music world would ever be the same again. The hall was still shaking from the storm of applause. People stood on their feet, clapping and cheering until their palms hurt. Some were crying, others were shouting, but all of them knew they had seen something unforgettable. The young woman stood in the middle of the stage, her father's old trumpet pressed against her chest. She could hardly breathe. Her heart was pounding. She had never dreamed this moment would come. She had never imagined a crowd would cheer for her. The famous musician stepped back, his golden trumpet hanging low in his hand. His face was pale but calm. The proud fire in his eyes had softened into respect. He looked at the young woman not as a rival, but as someone who had taught him something he had forgotten long ago. He raised his hand to silence the audience, and slowly the clapping faded. People sat down, waiting. The silence returned, heavy and expectant. The musician's voice carried through the hall, rough but steady. "Tonight, you did not just play the trumpet," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "You played life itself," the crowd murmured, nodding because they all felt the truth of his words. He continued, "I have spent years chasing perfection, years showing off my skill, but in chasing greatness, I lost what music truly means." His voice cracked for the first time. "And tonight," she reminded me. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head quickly, her lips trembling. "I am no one, sir," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I only played for my father. I wanted him to hear me, wherever he is." Her words struck the audience like another note of music, more powerful than any sound. People wiped their eyes. Some whispered prayers. Others held the hands of the person next to them. The famous musician walked toward her slowly. The hall watching with bated breath, he stopped just a step away, close enough that she could see the tired lines on his face. "Then your father must be smiling tonight," he said softly, "because he gave the world a gift through you." She clutched the trumpet tighter, unable to speak. For a moment, the two stood together in silence, the legend and the unknown, and in that silence the hall felt something greater than victory or defeat. It felt like truth. The truth that music was not about who played louder, faster or stronger, but about who could reach the heart. The musician then did something no one expected. He lifted her hand and raised it into the air. The hall erupted again in thunderous applause. The sound rolled like waves. People stomped their feet shouting her name, though most did not even know it. They only knew that she had changed them, even if only for one night. The young woman lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. Her father's voice echoed inside her. "One day, your trumpet will speak louder than words." And she realized that day had come. She had fulfilled her promise not by winning, but by playing with love. When the duel ended and the crowd left the hall, people carried more than just the memory of music. They carried a story, The story of a young woman who defeated a legend not with pride, but with heart. They would tell their children, and their children's children, about the night music itself was reborn. In the days that followed, her name spread quietly at first, then faster. Across towns and cities, people who had been in the hall told others about the girl with the scratched trumpet, about how she made them cry, about how she made a famous musician bow his head, and soon the story reached every corner of the country. But fame was not what she wanted. She returned to her small home, to the garage where it all began. She sat in the same broken chair her father used, her trumpet resting on her knees. She smiled through her tears and whispered, "Papa, we did it. I kept my promise." The garage was quiet, but she felt him there, as if the walls themselves hummed with his pride. The famous musician also changed after that night. He no longer played to show off. He played slower, softer, with more soul. He told his students and fans that skill without heart was nothing, that a trumpet without love was just a piece of metal. And whenever people asked him about the greatest duel of his life, he would smile sadly and say, "I lost to a girl with a broken trumpet, and it was the best loss of my life." The lesson of that night lived on, not only in music but in life. People remembered that greatness was not about fame or pride. It was about honesty, about giving everything you are, even if your hands tremble, even if your trumpet is scratched and old. The young woman had shown the world that truth, and in doing so, she had kept her father's dream alive forever. As years passed, her story became a legend of its own, told in cafes, schools, and music halls, but for her it was always simple. She was not a star, not a hero. She was just a daughter who loved her father, a daughter who once promised to never stop playing, and kept that promise until the night the world finally listened. And so the lesson remembered was clear. True music does not come from fame, from gold, or from pride. It comes from the heart, and when played with love, it can break walls, soften pride, and bring even legends to their knees. That was the truth the young woman gave to the world, and it was a truth no one would ever forget.